Hello, everybody. We're going to start a new chapter, turn over a new leaf, start a new chapter. And we're going to do this entire chapter because this entire chapter has to do with logical fallacies. And what you're going to find out is there are a number of different types of fallacies. We are going to be focused on, there are formal fallacies and informal fallacies. We're going to be focused on the latter, which are informal fallacies. And there are a number of them. And this is probably the part of the course where we spend the most time, most concentrated time. I think it is, because I think this is important for you to take away from logic, both for your own use, making sure your arguments are as strong as possible, but also in trying to analyze arguments made by other people, because as we work through these fallacies, you will recognize them. Oops. Okay. Oh, there we go. Come on. There we go. Fallacies in general. So fallacies are something that tries to make a bad argument a good argument. They are the tools that people use who are trying to intentionally manipulate information, and they're also accidents that people make when they're making arguments, just because they're not thinking logically. They create an illusion of a good argument, but there's always a mistake somewhere in their reasoning. Now, formal fallacies, which we're not going to spend any time on, but you've already seen, are fallacies that represent a brokenness in the form of the argument. So the logical pattern itself, even if the content, the premises are true, the conclusion doesn't logically follow, and it's obvious. And in that case, then we have to look at the structure of the argument to discover a fallacy. And because it's the actual way the argument's put together, that makes it a formal fallacy. The structure of the argument's broken. You're going to see in a moment that informal fallacies, it's more nuanced than that. It's not the structure of the argument that's wrong. It's something flawed in the logic itself. So in how the parts relate to each other. So this is the one you've already seen. All dogs are mammals, all cats are mammals, all dogs are cats. And you can see here that the form is broken. This should be A or B, B or C, and then you would have A or C, right? But this is broken because it is A or B and C or B. And just because A or B and C or B does not mean that A or C. It's not logical. Therefore, it's a formal fallacy. And they have names like affirming the consequence. This is one. And all that means is if it's conditional, if then, that's a conditional. If it's conditional, then you're affirming, you use the consequence to prove the conclusion, and that doesn't necessarily hold up, as you can see here. If it rains, the streets are wet. This is the consequence, right? So the streets are wet, therefore it rains. The problem is this is circular, and it also, as said here, there are other reasons. Because it's circular, it misses the point that there are other reasons that the streets could be wet. Could be sprinklers, could be they wash the streets with a street washer. Who knows? Perhaps in an informal argument, you could say perhaps it rained, and that would be correct. But in a formal argument where you're making a declaration of fact, then affirming the consequence creates a circular argument. Oh, golly. All right, here we go. All right. Informal fallacies are a mistake in the argument due to content or context. Depends on the type of fallacy. And they rely on irrelevant appeals. In other words, they try to use reasoning that is based on an appeal that is not logical. They use ambiguous language where maybe one word means a couple of different things, and they use that to draw their conclusion. Or they make arguments on assumption. They look persuasive, but they fail when analyzed for relevance, clarity, and truth. All right, so this is an informal fallacy. It's a fallacy of composition, actually. So we'll talk about what that is. The Brooklyn Bridge is made of atoms. Atoms are invisible. Therefore, the Brooklyn Bridge is invisible. Now, a fallacy of composition is taking a characteristic of a part of something and applying it to the whole. Yes, atoms are invisible, but you can't apply that to the Brooklyn Bridge. That's a fallacy of composition. You're taking the part and applying it to the whole, because we know the Brooklyn Bridge is not invisible. So there has to be a problem. Now, they're not all that straightforward. Here's one: you can't trust her judgment of argument about healthcare. She's not even a doctor. Well, that's an ad hominem. It is an appeal to the person, and declaring that a weakness about the person makes their argument about something less credible. So here you have, if A, then B, then C, and that's an attack on ad hominem, or that's an appeal to the person called ad hominem, because actually the fact she's not a doctor may make her more qualified to make an argument about healthcare policy. A doctor has a vested interest in healthcare policy. Someone who's not a doctor is less engaged at a personal level, less to lose, less to gain, and therefore we might want someone who isn't a doctor. So this argument is not even a good one, right? It'd be better to pick somebody else. But the idea is to disqualify the person because they're not even a doctor, and that actually has nothing to do with the basis of the argument. You can watch this if you wish. The slides are on on Canvas. It's a interesting analysis where a professor of logic goes through and identifies all the logical fallacies that Trump uses. And politicians use a form of speech called rhetoric, and rhetoric's meant to persuade. So a lot of times in rhetoric, you'll find logical fallacies slipping in, and Trump's not the only one that does it. He is, however, one of the best at it. So he's in here not because I'm trying to make fun of him, because his use of fallacies is textbook, and it's effective. So this is actually 2015, 16, 17, I can't remember, but it's when he announced he was going to run for president for his first term, for the first time, when he lost. So, no, when he won. Sorry, not the time before that, but the time he won, the first one, before there was an interlude where Biden was in the White House. So it's a really good example, and the professor does a great job. So watch it if you'd like. It's not required. It's just in here as an example that hopefully helps. All right, so the first category we're going to talk about of fallacies, or fallacies of relevance. And fallacies of relevance are either logically irrelevant, or they may have psychological relevance, but they don't pass the logical test. So it's really a case of logical relevance versus our tendency to think that they're psychologically relevant, if you see what I mean. So they have strange names, some of them. Some of them are pretty straightforward names, and you'll see as we work through them. They're listed down here. So in this category, there are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 of them, right? And they'll be, we'll go through over the next 3 weeks a whole set of fallacies, and they'll be grouped in order to hopefully make them easier to keep in your mind, because I think when we're done, there'll be maybe, 18, 20 of these. So if you can remember them by the group, then it helps. So these are fallacies of irrelevant premises. So the argument being made, the conclusion, is supported by premises that should not have anything to do with the conclusion, and they don't. So just keep that in mind. These are fallacies of relevance. which means that they contain irrelevant premises. It's a little confusing, but they don't meet the qualification for relevance, and therefore they're called irrelevant in their premises. So, all right. So an appeal to force. This always involves a threat by the argument. Do what I say, or you should believe what I say, or I will. You can't have any dinner. I don't know. We'll see some examples in a minute that are far better than that one. But it always involves a threat by the arguer for the use of force to enforce their conclusion. So threats are used as a premise, right? You should believe me because, and therefore, right? So therefore believe what I say or pay the consequence. If you don't support this policy, you'll lose your job. So you better agree with it, right? This is like a boss coming to a worker and saying, I want you to vote for this candidate. And if you don't, then I'll fire you, right? I don't know how they would know who you voted for, but it has a feeling of extortion, right? Where somebody makes you do something not because it's a logical argument, not because you should do it, but because they believe they have more power than you. That's not logical. There's no reasoning there. Now, in fact, we may sometimes do this in order to keep the peace, in order to keep our jobs, but we're not doing it for logical reasons. And the person that uses this kind of logic is not a good person, right? If they're manipulating you with force. So if you find yourself with a person in your life that uses this kind of approach, then you might consider trying to eliminate their presence in your life moving along. So some parents use this. Try not to, but when kids are small, sometimes you just get frustrated with all the whys and you say, do it because I said so. I'm the parent. That's an appeal to force. And when children are little, parents have an enormous amount of force. But of course, when you do that to a kid, you don't teach them anything. You teach them instead that right or might makes right, which is a pretty lousy piece of reasoning. An appeal to pity is inverse in a way. It's please pity me. Please accept my conclusion that you should give me an A on the paper, even though it's not an A paper, because I was going through a lot at the time. And I was working hard, but I just had so many personal issues, right? So that is your argument for an A is based on trying to get the other person to pity you. Passive-aggressive people will do this. You'll hear this a lot. And it's kind of funny how some of these informal fallacies, have a presence in some of our personal relationships, right? I think as humans, when we're in personal relationships with people for a long time, we live with them, they're in our family, whatever it is, we can fall into using these pieces of logic, right? Because we can play on their feelings. This is a play on feelings, right? And it's an illogical argument. I mean, it's not debatable. That it could be, I guess, but I'm going to take you at your word that you had a hard period of time here with some personal issues and you did the best you could, but that doesn't mean it's an A paper. So the two don't connect, if you see what I mean. So appeal to force, appeal to pity. Appeal to emotion, sometimes called appeal to people, sometimes called the bandwagon effect. So this is, you should do this because everybody else does this. If we don't pass this law, think of all the innocent people who will suffer, right? Appeal to emotion, right? So this is the arguer uses the reader or listener's desire for love, esteem, admiration, value. So this is one where the appeal to your emotion is your compassion for other people. This could be, hey, you should get the new iPhone because all the other cool kids are getting the new iPhone, or all the other cool adults are getting the new iPhone. So it's an appeal to emotion. It's trying to get you to do something by appealing to a basic need for admiration, value, similar emotions, esteem, compassion, etc. Okay, I see, now that I see this title, I realize the one before it's not called, let's see, let's go back. All right, so this is appeal to emotion, not the person itself, right? Okay, so let's back this up. So I make sure you get both of these correct, because we will see how these overlap, and sometimes that wasn't a very clear explanation. So let me do this again for you, and I want you to see how I'm having a conversation with these fallacies and realizing that I need to fine tune what I'm telling you, what I'm trying to teach you, because you need to have conversations with some of them too, because they appear to be very similar. So and this is one of those. Appeal to emotion and appeal to the people are similar in that they rely on emotion and they involve people, but the emphasis is different. This is an appeal to emotion. So ask yourself, if the argument seems to have a fallacy, like if we don't pass this law, think of all the innocent people, children who will suffer. If you don't, that's not a good necessarily the only reason for passing a law, right? I mean, it needs to make sense too. We could save all the children and create a lesser good, right? We might save the children, but create, I don't know, toxic air pollution. I'm just coming up with this. I don't know if that's true or not. Well, I know it's not true. I don't know if it flies or not, but you get the idea. I'm trying to get you to do something with your heart, right? The appeal to emotion. Now, it does involve people. It has to. So this is a direct appeal. Good way to think about this is an appeal to humanity, to your humanity. And sometimes things about being human aren't our best features, like admiration, like saying, "Wow, if you do this, everybody's going to think you are so cool. If you wear your underwear on your head, you will be so cool." So you get the idea. This is an appeal to our humanity. And this is an appeal to a direct and indirect appeal. There are two of them. Don't worry too much about it. I'm not going to ask you to distinguish between direct and indirect, and then also have to figure out when it's appeal to emotion or appeal to people. This is the one that is often called the bandwagon effect. So the other one is emotion. It's going to be an individual appeal. This is telling you need to get on board, because if you aren't on board, you don't have the features of this crowd of people that you want to be like, right? Everyone's buying the new smartphones, so you should get one too. So again, you see how I misspoke before. So that's a direct approach. It occurs when the arguer is addressing a large group of people, excites the emotion and enthusiasm of the crowd. Everyone should buy it. It's a commercial, right? It's what the commercial does it's what Apple's commercial does or tries to do, is they give you a really cool use of the phone and basically imply that you need this phone because everybody else is going to have this cool use, the ability to erase people out of their photos, and you won't have it. The indirect approach is the appeal more to individual qualities in the crowd. So only the most sophisticated people use this brand of perfume. One is popularity, the other one is a quality, but not an emotion, right? So appeal to emotion, appeal to something about your humanity that has to do with your heart. Appeal to the people is either an appeal to be like everybody else or to be like everybody else in a certain way, a certain quality that makes you a special human being. This is pure popularity. This is a certain human quality. Thanks for bearing with me on that. All right. Against the person or ad hominem, we saw this earlier when the argument was she can't make healthcare policy because she's not a doctor. Don't worry about abuse versus circumstantial too much. We're not going to really get down into the weeds. I just want you to be able. I want you to know they're out there, so I can say I told you about them. I'm not going to test you on them. But more importantly, I want you to be able to realize, because we do a ton of this in our arguments in politics today, that when people are making an argument that is against the person, they're saying something about the person, trying to get you to disqualify their argument because the person's that way. That's illogical. We do it, and it's hard for us not to sometimes, but it's not logical. So you say smoking's unhealthy, but I've seen you smoke before, so your argument's invalid, right? So that's got a very odd descriptor to it. To kook. I'm not even sure that's how that's said, because I haven't punched the little button online that says, would you pronounce this for me? Because I don't want you worrying about that. I want you to know that this is attacking the person based on their previous behavior, right? So what you're saying about smoking can't be true because you smoked before. Well, I don't smoke anymore because I know smoking's unhealthy. That I smoked before has nothing to do. See the disconnect? It's not relevant to smoking itself. Ad hominem circumstantial is discrediting the opponent's argument by alluding to the opponent's circumstances. So one is prior behavior, one is current circumstances. Of course you're pro-environment. You work for an alternative energy company. Well, that doesn't mean being pro-environment is wrong. It doesn't discredit the position of pro-environment. I mean, the person could work for an energy company because they're pro-environment, but because they work for an alternative energy company doesn't mean they're pro-environment. So it's circumstantial. The evidence is circumstantial. All right. Ad hominems. Accidents. All right. So it's when a general rule is applied to a specific case, right? So you take freedom of speech as a fundamental right, so you can say anything you want, even if it's hate speech and it incites violence. The Supreme Court used to say that you could not use hate speech and protect yourself under the concept of freedom of speech. But since then, the Supreme Court that originally made that ruling has had their ruling replaced by a Supreme Court that has said you are protected, even with hate speech, by the Freedom of Speech Act. This is freedom of speech, right to freedom of speech. This is an incredibly important right within our society, and we probably go further to protect it in that we cover more forms of speech than any society I really know of at this point. And that's not saying a whole lot, because I've lived some in other societies, but not all of them. So I can't say for sure. That's not a valid argument. It's just that we're at the top of the list when it comes to this. For instance, in Germany, to speak of Nazism, to display Nazi signs, that sort of thing is not protected by free speech. You can be charged with hate crimes for that. So this is when you take a general and you apply it to a specific. You're going to see another fallacy that's when you take the specific and apply it to the general, and that's called a genetic fallacy. But the accident is when you apply this general rule to a specific case. Now, this is actually correct now, this example, but it is still an accident to say this general rule means that you can do this. This is an argument we could have, and I probably need to get a better example since the Supreme Court flipped this around, but well, I'll be honest with you, this is what the book had in it, and I didn't look at it as closely as I should. But we will have other fallacies of accident that I can talk to you about to give you a better example. Missing the point and beside the point. So this occurs when the premises of an argument support one conclusion, but then a different conclusion is drawn. All right. So we need to increase funding for education, and person two says, well, spending more money on education won't solve all society's problems. So you're wrong. So that's not true. I mean, that is true. That is true, but it's not logical, right? Because spending more money on education the goal was never to actually solve all society's ills, right? So we need to increase funding for education is not making conclusion B. It's just it's the first conclusion. So assume that you have, there's two premises that prove we know when we fund education, we get people who are better citizens, right? And here are the facts of that. So we should increase funding in education, right? So this other person said, well, no, funding education won't cure all society's ills. Hey, I wasn't saying that, man. I was saying that funding education made better citizens, that it made people who participated more efficiently, effectively, and constructively in society. I didn't say it would solve all our problems. It certainly won't, but it will help us be a better society. So those things are different and subtly different for some people, right? It sounds like I'm saying education to some people will solve everything. No, but it will make a number of things better. So this is you missed my point, right? My point wasn't what you're saying. So think of it that way. You get to a conclusion, the person makes another conclusion, says, well, if that's your conclusion, then this, and that is, you missed my point. So some of these, like I say, are really named well. So missing the point is one of them, right? You missed the point of my argument. Straw man is, sometimes I think this is well named, and other times I wonder. So this is when I distort your argument to attack it, right? So your argument's really good, and I can't attack it the way it is, so I'm going to distort it. So person A concludes we should have stricter regulations on industrial pollution to protect the environment, right? So you assume they made their argument, A, B, and so you want to shut down all factories and put thousands of people out of work. That's ridiculous, right? Even without that, it's ridiculous. This is straw man, right? Because you're not arguing my conclusion. You can't argue my conclusion. It's no longer debatable that we are undergoing climate change. I'm getting tired of people saying, do you believe in climate change? There's nothing to not believe in. Scientifically a fact. Our Earth is getting warmer. Our oceans are rising. We have people that are having to move because of these climate facts. So we have climate refugees. It's proven, right? So we should have stricter regulations on industrial pollution to protect the environment is logically irrefutable given the right premises, right? But person B can't argue with that. It's not, he or she's not going to win that argument. So they go down another road and exaggerate a conclusion that's not even there. That's a straw man. And it is a really common, in addition to ad hominem, this is a very common fallacy in political debate. Now, red herring can give people problems because they will think, okay, if it's a red herring, isn't it kind of like a straw man? So whereas a straw man distorts an argument, a red herring changes the topic or the emphasis of the argument. So it's when an arguer diverts the listener's attention by changing the subject to a different one, and it's sometimes subtly related. So that's where it gets kind of easy to confuse this with a straw man. So here we need to address climate change by reducing carbon emissions. All right, again, I can give you two premises, I can give you six that says that is true. But what about all the people who litter in public places? We should focus on that instead. You see the difference there? You see the subtlety of that? Sorry, my watch went off. So whereas the straw man is trying to divert the argument slightly, right? The straw man is based on the argument. This is trying to change the subject. So before It's divert. This is change. It's trying to change the subject. What should we do? Should we do something about all the people who live in public places? If you're so concerned about the environment, well, we should, but that's not what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, we can have another debate on what should be done there. But this person doesn't want to do that because they can't argue with the conclusion. So it's distorting the conclusion like straw man, but it's changing the subject, not diverting the logic. All right. So, find the fallacy, 1 through 8. Hard work always leads to success. If you're poor, it's your fault because you didn't work hard enough. All right. So what does that sound like to you? I mean, we're blaming the poor for a lack of fortitude. And usually people who use this argument have never been poor, which is always interesting to me. I have actually been poor, and I've had family that have been poor. So I've got a pretty good fix on the fact that it's not a character flaw. Of course, you'll agree with my new policy. It's the right one, because if you don't, I'll make sure you're demoted. What does that sound like? Well, appeal to force. You should work through these on your own and see if you can, I will have, some of these I will have told you the answer. So you'll know this is appeal to force, but work backwards on them, right? Say to yourself, well, if it's appeal to force, then why is it appeal to force? Well, I'm going to demote you if you don't agree with my policy. Politicians don't stop supporting stronger immigration policies. We're going to face an invasion. They'll be to blame for every crime that happens as a result. Right? So what does that sound like to you? Well, it's a red herring. Because, this is completely changing the subject. We're stronger immigration policies have nothing to do with an invasion. Nobody's ever been invaded by immigrants. Invasion is a word that's used to cause people to have a visceral response. And you can't say that politicians who don't start supporting immigration policies are going to face to blame for every crime. That's a red herring. Now, in there is a lot of appeal to emotion, but that wasn't one of your choices. I try to do that. I try not to make them close. But because there's emotion in there, the emotion is part of the red herring. It is not the primary part of the fallacy. You should give me an A on this paper. My grandmother's been very ill. This should be pretty straightforward. Appeal to pity. So I'm not going to do all these. You can plug them into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will tell you which fallacy it is. But work through them, play with them. For those of you who are online, who this video is created for, if I come across exercises that you can just do that will give you practice, I'll put them up there. I'll put them on Canvas. But here's some embedded in the presentation itself that are meant to help you get some practice. So go through, practice them, take your time and reason towards them. And if you need to, write down the fallacies, write down whatever, associative word that will help you remember them, and then, work through these. Spend some time on them. You need to, there's readings in the book you should do. There's a set of slides that are these set in case you want to do anything with them. But you've got to work with these to get them. And even ask ChatGPT to test you on them. It's a great use of chat. I've said this a gazillion times. I'm never sure if people actually do it or not, but I've used it to help clarify thoughts when I've been writing papers and things, and to ask it to test me on what I'm saying. Is this correct? Now, it's not always right, but it's really good at logic because it's basically math itself. So you've got all these here you can work with. All right, that is it. If you have questions, run into any issues, can't figure it out because I wasn't very clear in my explanation, then send me a note. I'll be happy to clarify. We can talk. I can write you a response, whatever it takes. So thanks, everybody. I will see you on the next video.